The Stanley Cup Finals gets underway Saturday, June 8th, as the Edmonton Oilers will go up against the Florida Panthers. So let's preview the series. We're going to break it down with Shukri Wrights. He is a contributor to the Hockey News and host of the Hub of Champions podcast. Shukri, what's going on? How's it going?
I'm doing very well, Dexter. Thank you for having me on. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Excited for these Stanley Cup Finals to get underway. We have followed each other for a long time. I love your work in the hockey space. And I was like, got to get my guy Shukri up here. We got to talk about these Stanley Cup Finals. So let's get right into it, Shukri, because both the Oilers and the Panthers, they've had impressive runs to the finals. What do you see as the key strengths and weaknesses for each team as we go into game one?
Dexter, thank you for the kind words. I appreciate it. I mean, let's start with the Panthers. The Panthers have been a team that I've watched consistently over the last 2 years. And what the Panthers are doing right now is nothing short of impressive. Let's start with the strength with the Panthers. Listen, they built their entire team surrounding one player in particular, and that is Matthew Tkachuk. You know, he is very physical. He can play tough defense, aggressive with the forechecking, and so forth. And listen, they also, just like Matthew Tkachuk, can score goals. And that's part of what makes this team so much fun to watch when they're at their absolute best. They have star power, they have scoring depth, they have elite defensive habits, which will help them and will serve them very well in this Stanley Cup Finals against the Edmonton Oilers. Their weakness, and they don't have many of them right now, I got to go with Carter Verhaeghe, because Carter Verhaeghe last year was one of the major reasons why the Panthers made their run to the Stanley Cup Finals before they lost in 5 to the Vegas Golden Knights. This year, he was enforced early on in the Stanley Cup playoffs in their first round match against the Tampa Bay Lightning, in which that he scored goals in the 5-game series against the Lightning. But ever since then, he only has had a total of 4 goals total since then. So if you're the Panthers, you need Carter Verhaeghe to heat up again offensively in order for the Panthers to have a chance. Now, as far as the Oilers are concerned, I would say that their strengths are, as obviously you got to start with Connor McDavid, but you also got to talk about Leon Draisaitl. You got to talk about Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, Zach Hyman, and their defenseman, Evan Bouchard, who's having a breakout playoff so far. And when you look at the power play for the Edmonton Oilers, it's been the best in the Stanley Cup playoffs at 37%. So when you talk about the strength of the Oilers, you got to start with the power play, you got to start with the star power, the offensive power. The weakness for the Oilers, however, you got to look at their goaltending. Stuart Skinner has been a major question mark for the Oilers up until this past playoff round, and starting in the second round against the Vancouver Canucks, Stuart Skinner has finally been able to find his game, finally be able to put it all together. So when you look at the strengths and the weaknesses of both the Panthers and the Oilers, one would say that the Panthers' weakness a little bit on the minor side versus the Oilers, where their biggest concern is the goaltending, but Stuart Skinner has been a major reason why the Oilers have gotten to this point since halfway through the second round against Vancouver and in the Western Conference Finals against the Dallas Stars.
Yeah, and that's one thing when no team wants their goaltending to be the weakness, but it is a credit to what we've seen from the Oilers thus far to get to this point and get to the Stanley Cup Finals, and Skinner has played well at points along this way. So I think it's always fair, Shukri, to question if the regular season meetings between these teams matter at all here. So how do the regular season matchups between the Oilers and Panthers inform your expectations for the series, if at all?
It's a great question, because oftentimes we'll look back in sports at the regular season series between two teams that are playing for a championship and see if there's any sort of, like inkling or at least a clue to give you some sort of an idea as to how the series will go. I don't see it for the regular season matchup between the Panthers and Oilers. I think, if more than anything else, what you're seeing right now from the Oilers in particular is a very different team in comparison to when they were at their low point back in November. In November, they were 31st in the league. They have been able to figure things out, especially during the regular season, including their matchups against the Panthers in the regular season, in which that it's very hard for me to look at the regular season series between the two clubs and use that as a determining factor as to how the series will go, because this is a tale of two different Oilers teams that we've seen during the regular season and now in the postseason as well.
Right, and it's always about when you're looking about when those teams were playing, right? What time was it? Where were they in the season? How were they playing, et cetera, et cetera. So fantastic points there, and it's tough to gauge that with these two teams from their regular season matchups. Now, you mentioned this already, goaltending, always crucial in the playoffs. How do you evaluate this matchup between the Oilers' Stuart Skinner and the Panthers' Sergei Bobrovsky? How do you view this matchup? I think based on what you said before, I would think Bobrovsky has the edge here. Is that the case?
I would like to say, yeah, that Sergei Bobrovsky has the edge here. In these playoffs, he's 12-5 record-wise, 908 save percentage, and a 2.20 goals against average. And when you talk about what Sergei Bobrovsky has been able to do, has it been solid? Yes, but you have to take into consideration the fact that Bobrovsky has been helped out defensively. And when you have the defense that the Florida Panthers, like they have, with, like Gustav Forsling, Aaron Ekblad, who should be a factor in this series as well, Brandon Montour, that's going to help you tremendously. So you look at Bobrovsky and what he's been able to do with the defense, he's put up solid numbers. Not outwardly or, world-beating numbers, but good enough to get you to the dance. Now, when you look at Stuart Skinner, this is what's interesting. Stuart Skinner, at one point, was under a lot of heat in Edmonton because he was not playing well, and he was switched out at one point during the Oilers' run to the Stanley Cup Finals. But also, he's found his game, as I mentioned, since halfway through the Vancouver series in the Western Conference semifinals. But I also want to make this point very clear as well in terms of Stuart Skinner. The Oilers defensively and the way that they're set up makes it a really tricky position to be in to try to judge the two goaltenders, because the Oilers defensively, they're allowing just 25 shots per game. In today's NHL, that's pretty impressive. And in fact, that's the third fewest among all the playoff teams in 2024. And then with a penalty kill to complement that as well, that allowed 0 power play goals to the Dallas Stars in the Western Conference Finals. Stuart Skinner has had a lot of help in front of him, and which is a big reason why the Oilers are where they are, especially with the goaltending haven't gotten better as the playoffs have gone on.
Yeah, that should give them confidence going forward. We know the confidence that the Panthers have in terms of the defense they're able to play in front of Bobrovsky, and we'll see how that plays out here in the Stanley Cup Finals. Now, I got to ask you this about Connor McDavid here, Shukri, because you know this. He's widely regarded by many as the best player in the sport. Is he facing pressure to win his first Stanley Cup title and also deliver the Oilers' first championship since 1990? Is the pressure on him to do that in this series?
It's a fascinating question, because when you look at Connor McDavid, I think of him when he was drafted on June 26, 2015, at the same arena that he's going to be playing in Game 1 in the Stanley Cup Finals tonight, by the way, as the number 1 overall pick to the Edmonton Oilers. He's had the world of pressure on his shoulders since day one, as he was the best prospect coming into the league at that time, in which that this was someone that from day one, he has excelled all expectations. The only thing that was missing was he ever going to be able to get to the Stanley Cup Finals? Was he ever going to be able to win the Stanley Cup? And when you look at what he's been able to accomplish on career-wise, you talk about, the fact that he has 335 goals in his career, 647 assists in his career, and he's had 7 100-point seasons in his career already. He's accomplished everything. He's won the Hart Trophy. He's won the Art Ross and so forth. But now he has been arguably the best player on a team in which that at one point was the 31st ranked team in the league back in November, and now has a chance to help break the 31-year cup drought in Canada if the Oilers are able to beat the Panthers in the Stanley Cup Finals, which is part of the reason why that I do think that there is an element of pressure, not just to win the Oilers' first Stanley Cup since 1990, but also in Canada's cup drought, which a Canadian team has not won the Stanley Cup since 1993, the Montreal Canadiens.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up, because I do think that's part of the added pressure there, too. all of
Absolutely.
Canada is rooting for the Oilers. Well, maybe most of Canada, but they are all looking to see if they can break that 31-year Cup drought. So he's got the pressure of the franchise hasn't won in a long time, also the
Yes.
accolades that he wants, and then Canada hasn't seen a team win, hoist the cup in quite some time. So a lot of pressure there for sure. Couple more for you, Shukri.
Sure.
Every series, as you know, has its unsung heroes, and the Cup final is not going to be any different. Who are some of the X-factor players from each team that you think fans should keep an eye on?
That's a great question because oftentimes in sports, when you look at championship games or championship rounds, there's always the unsung hero. And in my opinion, I think Zach Hyman has got to be the unsung hero for the Edmonton Oilers, in which that they are going to need their forechecking game to come up huge. Zach Hyman, he is a forechecking winger that can control the net front, especially when you need to get in front of Bobrovsky. If he elevates his game, could be outwardly. Having a guy like Zach Hyman is important. But then also when you have a puck moving defenseman like Evan Bouchard, who could be a problematic matchup, that just go ask on the defenseman that he's also had to play against in these playoffs so far, he could also be a big factor. But also, not to be forgotten, I mentioned Evan Bouchard already. Mattias Ekholm, who I have been a huge fan of since he was acquired by the Edmonton Oilers at the trade deadline out of Nashville. So when you have Bouchard and Ekholm as your top pairing defenseman for the Oilers, that's huge. That's absolutely huge. And then also don't forget about Darnell Nurse. He has been criticized ever since he's gotten a big contract, but also this is someone who is also has the ability to jump in offensively. So I think the guys that I mentioned is Zach Hyman, Evan Bouchard, Darnell Nurse, and as well as Mattias Ekholm. Those are going to be the unsung factors or the X factors in this series for the Edmonton Oilers if they're going to win the Stanley Cup. Now, as far as the Florida Panthers are concerned, I will say that Gustav Forsling is number one on my list because Gustav Forsling, these playoffs, has had a come-out party where he's been arguably the best defenseman in the league in these playoffs. I've been feeling this way for weeks watching him going back to the first round against Tampa Bay when he beat my Boston Bruins in the best-of-7 series, and as well as what he's been able to do alongside Brandon Montour, who has 4 goals and 11 points in these playoffs. They are going to be very important to establishing what the Florida Panthers do well defensively, shutting down stars, something that they've done every series up until this point. You go back to round 1, they're shutting down Steven Stamkos and Nikita Kucherov. Round number 2, shutting down David Pastrnak and Brad Marchand as well. Round number 3, the conference finals against the Rangers, shutting down Chris Kreider, Jacob Trouba as well. So I think those guys, and including Aaron Ekblad, who's going to be healthy this time around, are going to be your X factors for the Florida Panthers in the Cup Finals.
All right, so we got our X factors for both teams. That brings me to the last thing. You know where we're going, Shukri. Time for a prediction. Which team do you think will win the Stanley Cup, and in how many games, and why? Let the people know your prediction. What you got?
This one I had the toughest one trying to decide because there is part of me that wants to see Connor McDavid win the Stanley Cup. And I do believe that fairy tales does not always end well in the playoffs, especially in the NHL. My heart wants to say the Edmonton Oilers and Connor McDavid winning the Stanley Cup, but I'm going to go with the Florida Panthers. And the reason is why I will say the Florida Panthers will win the Stanley Cup in 6 games. The reason why I say is because when I look at the Florida Panthers, and there is a historic precedence here, by the way. Remember the Pittsburgh Penguins of the late 2000s. In 2008, they went to the Stanley Cup Finals. They lost to the Detroit Red Wings. They lost in 6. The very next year, they went back to the Cup Finals, and they beat the Detroit Red Wings in 7 games. The Florida Panthers are the first team in 15 years to go back to the Cup Final for a second straight year after losing the year prior. And I think the experience that they've garnered from last year's playoff Stanley Cup Finals loss to the Vegas Golden Knights is going to serve them well when they go up against the Edmonton Oilers. I think they have the firepower, the defense, and as well as the defensive structure that's going to continue to be a factor for the Panthers against this Oilers team that is going to come in, and they're going to have to shut down that Oilers power play where it has been lethal in these playoffs. So I do think that the Panthers can win the Stanley Cup, and they will win it in 6 games.
All right, Shukri Wrights going with the Panthers, getting the unfinished business, taking care of it, and winning the Stanley Cup in 6 games. We will see how it all plays out. Stanley Cup Finals start Saturday, June 8th. Game 1 going down. Check out the work of Shukri Wrights. He's a contributor to the Hockey News, also the host of the Hub of Champions podcast. Shukri, glad we finally got to connect to talk some hockey. We will do it again soon, my friend. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Look forward to it, Dexter. Thank you for having me on.
Anytime.